The Stone Zone with legendary Republican strategist and political icon and pundit Roger Stone. Stone has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents. He is a New York Times best-selling author and a longtime friend and advisor of President Donald Trump.
Stone.
As an outspoken libertarian, Stone has appeared on thousands of broadcasts, spoken at countless venues, and lectured before the prestigious Oxford Political Union and the Cambridge Union Society. Due to his 4+ decades in the political and cultural arena, Stone has become a pop culture icon. And now, here's your host, Roger Stone.
Welcome. I'm Roger Stone, and this is our special Stone Zone Christmas edition. I want to thank all of you who have followed us through the year, signing up at Rumble on our regular feed. By the way, you can go to the Rumble app right now and go to to rumble.com/Roger Stone, the Stone Zone. Follow us there. In joining me tonight for our special Christmas show is the editor-in-chief of the Illinois Review, Mark Vargas. Welcome, Mark.
Merry Christmas to you, to your family, and to the Stone Zone listeners. Honored to be with you tonight.
Truly great to be with you. So I must say I see flashes of Reaganism. It's interesting that President Ronald Reagan warned us decades ago of the danger of relinquishing control of the Panama Canal. As Reagan famously said, we paid for it, we built it, it's ours, and how prescient that has turned out to be. Under Presidents Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter, we sold the Panama Canal, which we had paid to build as taxpayers under Theodore Roosevelt, and we had sold it to a Panamanian dictator for the princely sum of $1. Reagan actually revived his 1976 campaign against Gerald Ford after losing a series of primaries. Now, Donald Trump has echoed the words of Reagan because the situation in Panama has changed drastically since we did that transfer. Essentially, Mark, what has happened now is the Panamanian government is under substantial influence, if not the control, of the Chinese Communist Party. For example, the Panamanian government has not been willing to close the Darien Gap, which is essentially the opening in Panama into which hundreds of thousands of young military-age Chinese nationals have flooded up north and into the United States.
Roger, you know, what's interesting is we've paid for the canal. We've lost 5,600 Americans, and I double-checked that. 5,600 Americans died during the construction of the Panama Canal because of injury and or disease. And this is all part of President Trump's America First strategy. And this is why it's just remarkable to me that we built it. We had American lives die for it. The majority of the traffic belongs to the United States. There's no doubt about China's influence in areas before the port, after the port, around the port, and yet they claim a neutrality policy, which is absolutely laughable. Neutral how, when China controls just the economic interests, the national security interests? The ball is in the court of the Chinese. And who will openly admit that the Chinese are our friends? They're not. They're one of our largest adversaries. And so it's laughable that, you know, the Panamanian government is trying to claim neutrality and that this is our canal, when in fact it's not their canal. It really is China's canal. They're just managing it. But, you know, I can't help but think of the severe consequences and the national security threats that this poses because of Chinese overbearing significance and control over this canal.
You know, Mark, I never want to overestimate the geographic knowledge of some of our younger viewers. But what this means is the Panama Canal could become a choke point for all commerce. Anything we needed to go through the port, coming or going, would have to go the long way around essentially an entire continent, an entire section of the world. So it's extraordinarily dangerous. I do find it interesting that Trump is evoking Reagan, who turns out to be a sage on this issue. This was a matter of very hot national debate during the 1976 presidential campaign. And as I say, after Reagan had lost a series of primaries in first the Iowa caucuses, then very narrowly the New Hampshire primary, but resulting in a drubbing in the Florida primary and a downward trajectory. It was on the advice of Senator Jesse Helms that Reagan started talking about this issue. And the first time he used it in a speech, kind of as a test run, he saw the response to it. He hit Kissinger and Ford, both of whom had endorsed the proposal to turn over the canal for $1. The actual transfer was done legally under Jimmy Carter, who, needless to say, also supported this terrible idea. There was actually a very famous firing line debate between William F. Buckley Jr. supporting the Panama Canal Treaty, which turned over this huge asset, and the opposition. Speaking for the opposition was then Governor Ronald Reagan. It's absolutely worth watching. The other thing that's interesting is that the so-called Panama hat, the straw hat many Americans are familiar with, doesn't come from Panama, but it got its name during the construction of the Panama Canal. It was brought from parts of South America. Usually the very best hats are made with straw from Ecuador, and hat weavers from Ecuador, and that's where the so-called Panama hat came from. It was popularized because President Theodore Roosevelt went down to personally visit the construction of the canal, and he wore such a hat. And that made it, because of the news photos, it made it ubiquitously known as the Panama hat, which was in fact made in Ecuador.
I did not know that, Roger, and you are the fashion icon, and so I'm always happy to learn these things. But Roger, one quick point that I really wanted to emphasize. Then I had a quick question for you, and that is in terms of this national security, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that the Chinese can put surveillance equipment and monitor our traffic, monitor our shipping traffic, monitor our U.S. Navy traffic, and no one can validate whether or not there's been this sort of surveillance program on the Panama Canal by one of our largest adversaries to see what we're doing. And so that creates a massive problem. But Roger, it's absolutely brilliant, and there's so many ways, and you knew President Reagan very well. It's really interesting, the comparisons of President Reagan and President Donald Trump, their leadership, their boldness. But the question that I had for you is in terms of the President Trump really addressing this issue in his second term, was this something that the president thought about during his first term, or is this sort of the boldness and America First strategy as part of now this upcoming second term? Was there any discussions on this in his first term?
I actually, given the fact that Chinese influence and control in Panama has gotten much worse in recent years, I would suggest it just shows that he's following world events and the disastrous policies of some of his predecessors. I find it interesting that he also, at the same time, essentially throws out the rather whimsical idea of buying Greenland, which is he thinks might be strategically valuable to the United States, but which is having trouble sustaining itself as an economy because of the geographic, or I should say, the weather conditions and other factors. Whether that could ever really happen, I don't know. But it just shows Trump's, if you go back to the art of the deal, he talks about thinking big. I mean, that would be a big thing, the acquisition of another country. Who else would be audacious enough to even suggest that? I also think all of these ideas being thrown out here, all of which I think he's sincere about, also have the effect of distracting from the largest question, which is how is he going to go about, and how quickly can he stop the killing between Ukraine and Russia? That's a situation which it seems to me, just kind of reading the atmospherics, that Zelensky is more than ready to talk. After he makes a disastrous, essentially, campaign endorsement of Kamala Harris, which is like booking a stateroom on the Titanic, he goes running to Mar-a-Lago, a hat in hand, to kiss the derriere of one Donald J. Trump, because he's figured out that Trump is coming back. That he's acting like a man anxious. If he's anxious to continue to be fed millions, I think he's going to be disappointed. But if he's looking to negotiate to stop the killing and find a reasonable solution, he's certainly accessible to Trump. Anybody who pretends that the leader of Russia would not return a call from the president-elect or the president of the United States is absurd. The president-elect, I assume, will decide how to handle that best and when. I'm not going to second guess him. But if I look at it, I think in a weird way, they of course will immediately say you're a Russian agent for saying this, but I actually think Zelensky's been amazingly restrained in this whole war, hoping to get somebody to negotiate with. Remember, our State Department, it won't even speak with them and won't allow the Ukrainians to speak with them. So people who have no peace talks going or no negotiations try to avert a war and further killing are not interested in those as outcomes. They're just committed to war.
We hear often peace through strength, and I think President Trump's got peace through truth, because of what he posts on Truth Social literally brings our adversaries to their knees. And it's one of his greatest strengths is his unpredictability. But again, going back to, Roger, a point that you made several weeks ago, and I thought it was an excellent point that you made, that at the same time that Zelensky's flying into the U.S., addressing Congress, asking Washington and the American taxpayer to send more of their money to Ukraine while our own residents are suffering, are dying. Our major cities, residents in our major cities are living in third world-like conditions. And Zelensky does this while wearing cargo pants and a sweatshirt. And I thought your point on that, I think, was 100% spot on, that when you're going to ask for a sacrifice, like billions and billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars, have the decency and the respect to put on a jacket and a tie.
Yeah, Mark, I think it's interesting that when Zelensky went to the World Economic Forum to genuflect for George Soros and other leftist billionaires who were financing more of his thievery, he wore a suit and tie. But in addressing a joint session of Congress, or going to meet the president-elect of the United States in Paris, or in Mar-a-Lago for that matter, the man shows up like he's Rambo. It's disrespectful. We know he owns a suit because he wore it to the WEF, where, of course, he is lauded as a hero. Anyone, by the way, who thinks that this fight may be about democracy should understand that Zelensky is a president who has ordered all other political parties other than his to be illegal, has jailed his political rivals, shut down newspapers, radio stations, television stations, arrested journalists, and has refused to have new elections, essentially has indefinitely postponed them. So this is certainly not about democracy. Now, many Americans would be surprised to learn any of that because, of course, it's not widely reported in our U.S. press.
No, it's an excellent point. And again, this is when you hear about postponing elections, essentially making himself leader for at least the time being, you can't help but think about what Maduro's done in Venezuela, or Xi Jinping making him the leader for life, changing their constitution in China. And while he's acting and behaving like a third world dictator, the Democrats can't run fast enough to him and embrace him. And they're certainly not afraid to use the U.S. taxpayer checkbook and continue to write him fat checks when, in fact, his behavior and his actions are not of a democratic leader, but as a third world dictator.
Yeah, it is extraordinarily strange. Looking at the Biden pardons, and they seem incongruous. They seem very odd to me. I'm sorry, but I rather doubt that in these life or death decisions that President Biden sat down and read anything about the cases and the legal status and judgments against the vicious killers that he seems to have pardoned. So it appears to me that someone with an extreme agenda has made up this list. I doubt Joe knows who's even on it. But they're so odd and they're so random. The relatively minor municipal corruption in one state by a county clerk, but then commuting the death sentence of 37 people just arbitrarily without any views about contrition or any of the facts of those cases. It seems very odd to me. Now, in other cases, some of them make perfectly sense. A Chinese national who was caught with a giant stash of child pornography is pardoned. Not that anyone in China might have paid for that or anything. Please.
It is remarkable. And Roger, being a part of your executive clemency as well as Rod Blagojevich, you don't truly understand the power of the presidency and the power of the presidential pen than when discussing presidential pardons and commutations. It is essentially the sole power of the president, and it can't be questioned. But I can't help but think that these very dangerous pardons and commutations that, by the way, I looked this up, Roger, when you look at the Justice Department, usually in your commutation, your full pardon, you have actual President Trump's signature. What's very clear is that these are auto pen signatures when the Justice Department releases copies of the commutation or the pardon. So Joe Biden isn't even sitting down and signing these. These are all done by an auto pen, and you can certainly tell the difference. But I think we've got a clip here, Roger, of one of the families of victims of one of the 37 killers that President Trump has commuted their death row sentence. They are shocked. And you can only imagine, Roger, all of these families that have been affected by these violent and dangerous killers and the post-traumatic stress disorder that this brings back. The fear, the worry, the anxiety, the pain, the depths of the pain that these families have experienced. And for no other reason than politics, Joe Biden commutes these sentences. I think we have this clip. Let's take a look.
On Sunday afternoon, I was actually gathered with my in-laws for our family Christmas. My sister was gathered with her in-laws, and we got the call, and I was angry. I'm still angry. I am upset that this is even happening, that one man can make this decision without even talking to the victims, without any regard for what we've been through, what we're going through. I'm completely hurt, frustrated, and angry.
So, Heather, nobody gave you a heads up that this was coming from the White House?
In May, we heard that this was a possibility. And at that point, we began writing letters to the pardon attorney. I reached out requesting an in-person meeting in D.C., and we were refused. They denied our right to have our voices heard. We're victims. My mother was murdered at the hands of Brandon Hansel. They should have heard our story. And all we got was a 10-minute virtual conference. And clearly that fell on deaf ears. They did not want to hear our story.
Danny, Joe Biden, or whoever made this decision, because it is entirely unclear whether this came from him directly or his people, he's showing mercy to your wife's killer. Was your wife shown any mercy?
She was shown no mercy at all. This man walked into the bank, never said two words to her, shot her 3 times in total. Went and shot her coworker, Katie Skeen, as well, who was totally defenseless and unaware that anything was happening. It's just beyond me that I can't even believe that this has actually happened, a commuting of sentences like this of 37 victims, all but 3, which was certainly a political scheme that undoubtedly. Joe Biden was also told by the Pope that he should stop these executions. Now, what the Pope has to do with anything in this country, I don't know. But Joe Biden certainly has no convictions. He's a senile old man. He couldn't tie his shoes, I wouldn't think, if you could see him in person. It's absolutely disgusting.
It is disgusting. And Roger, you're a presidential historian. Have you ever seen a president at the end of their term commute such egregious sentences like those of pedophiles and very violent and dangerous rapists and murderers? I can't recall.
Well, Mark, because the subject on the table is pardons, the New Republic has sought to distort the facts regarding mine. Say a few things about my case. It wasn't until a federal judge ordered it that we learned that the judge in my case withheld exculpatory evidence from my defense attorneys, specifically the final, full, unredacted version of Robert Mueller's final report. Now, my attorneys had requested it via filing to the judge, who denied it to them, saying that she would read the report in chambers and give us those sections of the report that we deemed relevant to us. But she didn't give us the portion that a federal judge forced the DOJ to release, which they did, strangely enough, Mark, at midnight in a press release on Election Day of 2020. In other words, the busiest media day in the world, a day in which you would want a story to get no press. We also know, of course, after the trial and my guilty conviction, the trial forewoman who had run for Congress as a Democrat and who was a protege of Donna Brazile, but who insisted nonetheless in a jury selection and during the trial under oath that she wasn't familiar with me or my case, when in fact she had been attacking me and President Trump by name on Twitter and Facebook, but had those comments, on a closed or private basis. And later she tried to quietly delete them. She was actually commenting on the very case she would later be denied knowledge of and be selected a juror in. And she said that any supporter of Donald Trump was a racist. The judge later ruled that there's no reason to believe that the witness would know that Roger Stone is a Trump supporter. I kid you not. So, I was also denied all of my basic constitutional rights. We specifically had the judge rule that evidence of any corruption by the DOJ, the FBI, the special counsel's office, or any member of Congress, Adam Schiff, could not be used in my defense. A direct violation of a Supreme Court decision, Kiles v. Whitley, that holds that the integrity of an indictment is always grounds for defense. And secondly, of course, it was when the FBI was forced to admit under oath that they never inspected the computer servers at the Democrat National Committee, establishing that as a fact. Well, at that point, I had to be gagged over this ridiculous ruse that I threatened the judge, which is totally false if one will examine the facts and not the media-created media storm about it. So the abuse of prosecutorial authority in my case is really quite extraordinary. Just on the basis of the jury forewoman, left to right, every judicial scholar insisted that my conviction be vacated, but I would have been most likely subjected to a new trial. But the judge would not allow that. Yes, the facts of my case justify the pardon, because to violate the False Statements Act, one has to act willfully, and it has to be material, meaning covering up some underlying crime. There was no Russian collusion. There was no WikiLeaks collaboration. There was no other crime. And Mueller admits it in black and white in his final fully unredacted report. So from that moment, I have felt entirely vindicated. That is completely different than any of these pardons. Then there's the false claim that I argued for a second pardon because I said that ultimately I saw that the deep state would make anyone exercising their First Amendment rights to question the outcome of the election as targets of prosecution. And I was mocked. I said the president should pardon every Republican member of Congress who talks about it, every Republican senator, every member of his staff, every one of his surrogates, every one of his prominent supporters, because they're going to deem this a crime. I was laughed at. But then they charged supporters of the president with exactly that in Arizona, in Georgia, and of course federally as well.
Roger, above the United States Supreme Court building are the words "equal justice under law," and there was a time when I believed that. But knowing about your case and other cases, whether it's General Flynn or Rod Blagojevich or most certainly President Trump, that is certainly not the case. And what both you and Nydia have had to endure, both personally and financially, what happened to you, Roger, is no different, for example, than a dirty cop planting a gun in order to frame an innocent person. The only crime that you committed was being a loyal friend and supporter of President Donald Trump. And look no further than that pre-dawn raid of nearly 30 FBI agents and SWAT team members who barged into your home in front of, by the way, the cameras of only one network, CNN, now home to all of these corrupt former federal prosecutors who are corrupt, who are now on CNN as political commentators after they've destroyed lives and livelihoods and have lied. They're the real criminals. But when you catch that on television by CNN of this pre-dawn raid and they wake your wife up with staring at the barrel of an assault weapon, where they've got amphibious teams in your backyard as if you're going to do some James Bond underwater escape with your wife, is completely laughable. And after wasting tens and tens of millions of taxpayer dollars to the tune of $30 or $40 million for this Mueller special counsel report to come out, what did it say? There was nothing there, but the damage and destruction in its wake is irreversible. And so, Roger, you have been vindicated. You continue to be vindicated every time, as you say, Eric Swalwell and Adam Schiff, every time they open their mouths, they're lying, and it only makes the cases around us even that much stronger when these two guys who have no credibility are pretending to be the credible ones.
No, you raise an extraordinary issue, and one of my favorite ones, and that is the hypocrisy of Senator Adam Schiff, who has gotten elected to the Senate very cleverly because of California's unique jungle primary, in which everyone of all parties runs in one election, and then the two top vote getters face off in a runoff, regardless of whether they're in the same party or different parties. In order to avoid facing off against a progressive Democrat, essentially Adam Schiff funneled money to Republican Steve Harvey, who could have come in second, but could never have come in first in a runoff, not because of him, but because of the now Democrat nature of the state. It is a solidly blue state, and by the way, they cheat on elections. So we just saw a 2024 election in which more voters in Orange County, Mark, voted than are registered to vote. But don't look here, folks. These congressional seats that we saw stolen in the last 30 days, by the way, were fully computerized, but a month after the election, we're still finding and counting votes right there in the Golden State. It's really quite extraordinary, Mark.
It is. And you already can hear Schiff beating that drum of wanting to go after President Trump again. And he wants to pick up right where he left off after his first term. But we're beginning to learn. We've known this, all of the corruption in that headline about with Schiff and Swalwell with these leaks. It's unbelievable. When are they going to get prosecuted?
Yeah, let's break this down. A new Inspector General, this is not a House committee report, but the Inspector General of the current administration released a report saying that the FBI was well aware of the fact that Adam Schiff and Congressman Eric Swalwell, and more precisely members of their staff, were leaking classified documents in violation of the law, going specifically to the New York Times. The FBI knew this, and they began to monitor staff members. It's interesting, however, of course, no charges were ever filed against them. So here are Schiff and Swalwell. This is not the first time. First of all, my testimony was classified, therefore discussion of it under the House rules is not allowed. But the moment I left the room, both Swalwell and Schiff are having a press conference saying that I perjured myself, that I lied under oath. How would they know such a thing? Well, it's very simple. The Mueller prosecutors went to a federal judge and said, Your Honor, we have probable cause to charge Roger Stone with treason, conspiracy against the United States, counterfeiting, money laundering, illegal access or unauthorized access to a government computer, mail fraud, wire fraud, aiding and abetting a conspiracy before and after the fact. Of course, they had no evidence of any of those things and couldn't find them after going through 1 million emails. So they decided they had to frame me on this process charge of lying to Congress. Now, it's interesting. Apple today refuses to hand over the contents of the telephone of the man who's alleged to have shot President Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. They say it would be an invasion of his family's privacy or his, even though he's deceased. But Apple handed over my phone records to Mueller's investigating committee without a subpoena, just based on a politely worded letter. So you can see how the big tech companies play politics, Mark.
You can. And here's the scary part is you have a guy like Schiff who can lie, cheat, steal, manipulate, bastardize the U.S. Constitution, frame innocent people. And then what happens? He gets promoted to the most respected deliberative body in the world, known as the United States Senate. And Roger, it's very easy as all of the truth comes to light, all of these stories that come out, you can begin to connect the dots and understand why the deep state and the FBI officials fear Kash Patel's confirmation as FBI director. You can feel why they fear a Pam Bondi as a United States Attorney General, because this is going to open Pandora's box, and the chickens are going to come home to roost. And for the first time, the roles will be reversed, and they will be held accountable for these actions that they have taken over the last 8 years that have destroyed lives, livelihoods, and have made our country a mockery around the world.
Mark, to finish the thought, to make it absolutely clear, after federal prosecutors got access to my emails, they then shared them illegally with Adam Schiff. That allowed him to fashion these gotcha questions, all of which, of course, are immaterial. In other words, any misstatement I made to the committee does not hide any other insignificant fact. Case in point, did you get an email from Steve Bannon? I don't recall. Or perhaps I said no. They said, you lied, here it is. It is simply a link to a story that was on that day's front page of the Washington Post. Relevance? Materiality? No. So it was a frame job, and people understand that. The whole idea is once they went through the emails and they found no Russians, or more precisely, the one Russian contact they found was the FBI informant they sent in to talk to me. I documented that. It was a 15-minute conversation and entirely benign. Tried to shake me, i.e. Trump, down for $2 million for unspecified data he was going to sell us. Unfortunately, he is a Russian national in Miami, signed in for by the FBI station chief here in Miami, a known informant who was, I believe, sent to my doorstep. So that's what you learn from the Mueller fiasco. But look, Adam Schiff is a man who said that he had seen more than circumstantial evidence of Russian collusion with Donald Trump's campaign. And of course, he never produced any. Today, when he's asked, he would tell you his investigation was a total success because we proved that a high-level Trump campaign official was passing polling information to a Russian intelligence asset. That's his cover story. He refers, of course, to Paul Manafort, who he alleges passed information to a man named Konstantin Kilimnik, who he claims, without basis or foundation, is a Russian intelligence asset. Andrew Weissman often repeats this same lie. Well, first of all, if you check with Manafort or with Trump pollster Tony Fabrizio, or you look at the payments in their FEC report, you will see that the Trump campaign has no proprietary polling information to pass to anyone. So anything Manafort had passed to Kilimnik would have been publicly available on the internet. Secondarily, Matt Taibbi, the independent journalist, I think has documented extremely well that Konstantin Kilimnik, who previously worked for John McCain, that deep stater, was in fact working as a U.S. intelligence asset, and that wires from our embassy in Kyiv to our State Department and intelligence agencies, where his name is redacted as a source, prove that he is an informant for the U.S. government. But then, of course, Schiff knows that. So does Weissman. But that's how they use to cover their total failure. Then they say, well, Roger Stone was in touch with the known Russian intelligence asset Guccifer 2.0. Speaking of a benign Twitter direct message exchange, they failed to mention that it was 3 months after WikiLeaks had already posted all of their information regarding Hillary Clinton or the Democrat committee, and the actual content of our 28-word exchange, which I released, is completely benign. No evidence of collusion or coordination. It's actually quite mundane. But they know that, yet they repeat this lie. Well, he was communicating with a Russian intelligence asset. By the way, we're not even sure that Guccifer 2.0 or that persona on Twitter isn't really John Brennan. There's a lot of forensic evidence that this is a cutout for our own intelligence services.
Roger, I've gotten this question from several people, and I think you're the appropriate person to ask, and it's about President Biden and his team considering a preemptive pardon for Adam Schiff. We know how corrupt he is, his lies, how he's gone after you personally and President-elect Trump. Would a preemptive pardon, I mean, is that the end of the road, or are there other legal avenues that could be taken to hold Schiff accountable, or is a pardon, is that it, and he walks scotch-free?
Well, first of all, we don't know, as you pointed out, the full extent of his actual crimes because much is largely being hidden. I revealed things today that are not publicly known, but Mueller prosecutor sharing my emails with his staff would be a violation of law, just for example. But then, as far as CNN is concerned, I was arrested at 6:06 in the morning. At 6:11, a CNN talking head texts my lawyer a copy of my sealed indictment, which is not sealed until 10:30 that morning in Washington by a federal magistrate. It doesn't have any stampings or court markings on it, so it's not been publicly released. But if you look at the metadata tags attached, it has the name of the man who wrote it, and therefore the man who leads it. That would be Andrew Weissman. Now, that is a felony to release a search or arrest warrant in advance of it being executed, but the judge in my case, of course, didn't care. This is what they mean when they speak of two-tier justice. Yeah, I had an FBI agent. I saw it by watching from an upper window because I had figured out that they were likely to come. Remember, I was wearing a Roger Stone Did Nothing Wrong t-shirt when arrested. By the way, you can get yours right now at StoneZONE.com and go into the store. I think we have them on special for Christmas. but I was wearing that when I was arrested. I saw the CNN camera crew appear before the FBI and set up 25 feet from my front door. I would later learn that the entire street, which was a dead end, was roped off about a quarter of a mile down the road. The road was closed. All other media was being kept behind a fence, but CNN was allowed up close and personal. I have an affidavit from a Fort Lauderdale police officer, now retired, who said when he told the CNN crew that media had been instructed to get behind, at the end of the road, behind the rope, he was chewed out by an FBI agent who said they have special permission to be here, which will be great when they make the documentary film on the outrageousness of the case against Roger Stone. But you're absolutely right. The real question here is for Swalwell and Schiff. They've broken numerous laws. This is not the first time. These are actual crimes. So a grand jury in Los Angeles could indict Mr. Schiff, for example. This is up to the judicial process. I think it should be fair. But look, here we have a little video of Adam Schiff. Well, look at the way his attitude is shifting quickly.
On the day Donald Trump leaves office, the Justice Department may indict him.
Very strongly in favor of indicting the president when he is out of office.
I don't think the incoming president should be threatening his political opponents with jail time. That's not the kind of talk we should hear from a president in a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, if it's Schiff, flush it. This guy is so full of it. He lies repeatedly about what he's seen. He has nothing to show for his Russian collusion witch hunt. And he is reduced to this ridiculous argument about polling and Manafort or me and some Russian asset on Twitter direct messages, whose software, by the way, is registered to somebody who works at the Democrat National Committee. It's really so much for their heavy sourcing. It's interesting, on the day I was pardoned, Robert Mueller, meaning Andrew Weissman, had an op-ed piece in the Washington Post that says Stone was regularly in touch with Russian intelligence assets with an S. But when they can't even prove it, I was in touch with one. Of course, you realize that I could have proved in my trial there was no online hack of the Democrat National Committee at all. Bill Binney, the counterintelligence IT expert for the CIA for many years, was prepared to testify and had forensic evidence that the data stolen from the DNC did not come via online hack, but was illicitly downloaded to portable drives of some sort and taken out the back door of the building, most likely by someone who's angry about the fact that party rules are being manipulated to stop the surging Bernie Sanders, who was not even a registered Democrat roughly a year before, but was beating the tar out of Hillary Clinton, who was shop warm and terrible on the stump. Who can forget the way she affected a Southern accent when she was in the South? Actually told a black audience that she had regularly carried a bottle of hot sauce in her purse. My ass. So, I mean, it is extraordinary that all of these people so far have evaded any responsibility. I mean, the Russian collusion hoax, Mark, is the largest single dirty trick in American history. It's an abuse of power in which the full authority of the United States government, legal authority, and the extraordinary capability of our intelligence agencies are utilized using two pieces of what they already know are fabricated evidence. The so-called Steele dossier, which Andrew Weissman, going back to his days as general counsel to the FBI, working for who else? Robert Mueller, knows the provenance of it. It is a fabrication paid for initially by Hillary Clinton. Perhaps the earlier aspects are paid for out of a right-wing, never-Trumper think tank. And they know that these stories about Donald Trump cavorting with Russian prostitutes, urinating on a bed, they know that this is nonsense. They also have no evidence at all of a Russian hack. Even though the lawyers who prosecuted me insisted to the court in a rare filing that they had additional evidence beyond the CrowdStrike's report, which was the third-party report that alleges the Russian hack of the DNC. which the judge would not give to my defense attorneys for my defense, even though the head of CrowdStrike's, Sean Henry, later testifies before the House committee, admits under questioning that his famous report includes no proof whatsoever that the Russians hacked the DNC. So they know that the two major pillars of their theory, which they use to rationalize the appointment of Robert Mueller by acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. You remember him. He is the guy who volunteered to wear a wire and go into a meeting with President Trump in some harebrained plan to remove Trump under the 25th Amendment. That Rod Rosenstein, he testified to Congress, Mark, that he didn't authorize the investigation into Roger Stone, except for I have released in discovery, or released publicly, I should say, a copy of his authorization dated October 17th, 2018.
Roger, what's interesting, and it shows you how the depth of the deep state and what I like to call the uniparty is, you think about going back to the Blagojevich case. Who was the federal prosecutor in the Blagojevich case? None other than Patrick Fitzgerald. Who's Patrick Fitzgerald? He's Jim Comey's best friend. They sharpened their teeth together in the Southern District of New York. Jim Comey has been on the record during a congressional hearing and said, Patrick Fitzgerald is the finest lawyer I know. He's also the godfather to his children. Who was the FBI director that ordered the pre-dawn raid of the sitting governor of Illinois, a raid that mirrored your raid that would only happen years after that? It was Robert Mueller. And so to think that after Trump rightly fired James Comey as the FBI director, who did James hire as his attorney to defend him and to go after the president? None other than Patrick Fitzgerald, a man who said in the Blagojevich case, I'm stopping a crime spree before it happens. Before, which means there is no crime. Nothing happened. And to see, Roger, that these same individuals back in 2008 are still around today and have been going after both you and President Trump, it's remarkable. And I think, Roger, and this is a phrase that you coined during the AmFest, and I thought was brilliant, and President Trump has used this same phrases about this new golden era is upon us, Roger. And I know that President Trump put out a post today on his Truth Social and said, thank you, Roger Stone. I think we have a clip of that. But Roger, when you're talking about we're about to enter a golden age, I have to think that you're also talking about, as part of this new golden age, is bringing accountability back and holding these individuals like Fitzgerald, Mueller, and Comey, and Schiff and Swalwell, finally holding them accountable.
Mark, the left keeps referring to this as revenge or retaliation. Those are people who are crapping their pants about being prosecuted for the very serious material crimes they've committed, and they know it. We're talking about a rebalancing of the scales of justice. We're talking about returning America to a time when there was one standard, where people really did lie to Congress, like General James Clapper, who said we have no data collection program on American citizens until, of course, Edward Snowden proved he was lying. He teaches ethics today and has a fat-paying gig at CNN. Or John Brennan, who actually lied to a Senate committee about spying on a Senate committee that was investigating his illegal use of torture in Afghanistan. And you can't make this stuff up. He, of course, publicly apologized for his lies and was not prosecuted. Or Rod Rosenstein, who said he didn't authorize the investigation into Roger Stone when he did. This list goes on and on. James Comey lying multiple times, 121 by my count, on material matters, but none of them prosecuted. John Durham was supposed to be the cleanup man, the guy who wrote the special counsel report on the origins of the Russian collusion hoax. Takes 5 long years, Mark, to reach conclusions that folks like Molly Hemingway proved, almost 4 years ago. And many other courageous journalists. So what took so long? Well, I'll tell you, we have to make sure the statute of limitations has run so that Jake Sullivan and John Podesta and Hillary Clinton and James Comey and John Brennan and Susan Rice and Vice President Joe Biden and so many others don't face criminal prosecution. It's a manipulation of the issue. Barr essentially appoints Durham to get people off his back, saying that the truth is coming, and there's a lot of optimism. Now, Durham does outline the central parts of the crimes, but he never touches the whole question of the alleged hacking of the DNC, which is a key element of their fake narrative. He doesn't address it at all. If my lawyers contacted him, but he never responded to us. Bill Binney offered to prove to him that the DNC had never been hacked. But again, John Durham curiously did not respond to those attempts through an attorney to reach him. So I think that in the end, this would take the pressure off and then report what was by then old news and, more importantly, largely unprosecutable. When Mr. Durham did bring a case, it was against a low-level lawyer named Sussman. This would be like indicting the guy who was driving the getaway car for double parking while you let the people who robbed the bank get away. This is indicting the guy, the lowest guy on the food chain, not the guy who funneled his payment for the Steele dossier from the campaign into a law firm to pay for it, to hide it from the FEC, for which Hillary Clinton paid a very sizable fine. No, don't indict him. Indict the guy essentially driving the getaway car. Is Jake Sullivan, you recall, who this case reveals, knew that there was no secret computer terminal at Trump Tower that had him in contact with a Russian bank, but told Hillary Clinton to say it anyway and to post it, which she did. Here we go again, Mark.
Here we go again. Roger, what's interesting is who would have thought that, and again, this is the importance of the Trump mandate after the November election. Americans saw this unfold in real time, and how you were attacked and so many others within President Trump's circle were attacked, and how the president himself was attacked using the full weight and resources and power of the United States government to target a political enemy. And that is why the President Trump's mandate is so historical. And to borrow the line from Van Jones, Donald Trump's smarter than all of us. How do we know? Because he's got the White House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the popular vote. But what I find interesting, Roger, is you're beginning to see even some Democrats that are sort of waving the white flag and defending the President Trump's movement and defending President Trump supporters, like Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman, who came out in an interview and shocked the interviewer by saying, the Trump supporters are not fascists. And Roger, as President Trump's momentum continues to grow, as you see the infighting continue to destroy the Democratic Party, I think we're going to begin to see more Senator John Fettermans come out and speak out in support of Trump supporters.
Mark, I think you're absolutely right. I would bet you that there are more people in MAGA wearing John Fetterman style sweatshirts than there are in all of the Democrat Party, because he has a blue collar sensibility. And he's been talking a lot of common sense. I also believe that he and his left wing wife have split. I believe I read that. So I think perhaps he is free of her leftist influence. Also, his health hasn't improved. Remember, he had some serious health issues, which, unless this is a body double, which some have alleged, then he seems to have received his faculty in terms of speech. He was really rendered virtually ununderstandable after what I think was a stroke or a brain hemorrhage or something of the sort. But he's interesting. Do you go back? I'm going to hit this because I must. The Blagojevich case is really an extraordinary one. It is one, and essentially Rod Blagojevich was charged and convicted, essentially because he refused to just hand over the Senate seat that was being vacated by President Barack Obama to his assistant and major domo Valerie Jarrett. the government alleges that there are taped phone conversations from a wiretap that prove this, but they refuse to play them in court, where a man is entitled to face his accusers. There's no evidence that Blagojevich sought or received any financial gain. Yes, he is a great politician. He saw that this was a political bonanza for a sitting governor allowed to appoint a senator. There's nothing wrong with political alliances, but his refusal to appoint who Obama wanted got him charged, and then essentially the government convicted him without producing any evidence of their alleged crime, even though what he's accused of doing, I think, was actually known as engaging in politics. It's one of the earliest cases of a weaponized criminal justice system in which the guy who was the earliest governor in the United States to support Obama's presidential campaign is sent to prison for 8 long years when he's really absolutely done nothing wrong. Now, his sentence was commuted as an act of mercy. Thank Jesus Christ and God for that, as well as President Donald Trump. And I hope the president will consider pardoning Rod Blagojevich, giving a full and unconditional pardon. The politicians in Chicago are already sweating because that would make Blagojevich, who's extraordinarily popular, a potential candidate for mayor. That city is imploding. Now, you saw recently, Mark, the mayor of New York says all of the city's crime problems are because of Richard Nixon. What? The guy who desegregated the public schools? The guy who gave us affirmative action? The guy who quadrupled the funding for black colleges? The guy who gave us the Office of Minority Business Enterprise to offer low-cost loans to black entrepreneurs? That president? No, Mr. Mayor, I think not. Skyrocketing crime is caused by soft on crime, high tax policies creating a disaster. And everybody knows that Rod Blagojevich, who was a moderate Democrat who got things done, could probably save what they used to call the city that works. So right now, the collective body politic in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois has puckered their derriere, worrying about Rod making a comeback. Now, I should be fair. He hasn't said he's running. I don't believe he has any plans to run. He's been on my show several times. He's a great guest, and it's a tribute to him that he would do that kind of time unfairly, but not come out a bitter, broken man, come out a man thankful to God, thankful for his family, thankful to President Trump, and still, I think, Mark, one of the shrewdest analysts of the political scene that I've met in the many years I've been in this business.
Yeah, does this sound familiar, Roger? Corrupt judge, check. Corrupt prosecutors, check. Corrupt jury, check. Hiding evidence and blocking evidence that prove your innocence, check. I mean, this is like Yogi Berra said, here we go again. This is deja vu all over again. And you're right. They sent him to prison for 14 years. He served 8 until President Trump saved him and returned him to his loving wife and to his daughters. But all they did was lie, cheat, and steal to get into conviction in order to protect the Messiah, Barack Obama.
Well, and the bad news for them is I think Rod Blagojevich spoke out very strongly for President Trump, providing a bridge for hundreds of thousands of blue-collar ethnic Catholics who think of themselves as Democrats to vote for a Republican. Why? Because like Tulsi Gabbard, like Robert F. Kennedy, Rod Blagojevich has common sense, and he therefore wants to follow the common sense America First principles of Donald Trump. I hope to have dinner with Rod Blagojevich soon, because if you're indicted, you're invited. Thanks, many of you. Merry Christmas, and many thanks from both Mark and I for joining us today on the Stone Zone. We are on hiatus, of course, until next year. Come back in for the all-new Stone Zone. Again, you can follow us by going to rumble.com/RogerStone. Follow us there. You see the little green follow button. Set yourself a notification. You can get the Rumble app at your app store. We'd be proud to have you on board. Again, thank you from the bottom of our hearts here at the Stone Zone. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next year.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?